Welcome on, everyone. I'm going to invite my co-host, Pei-Shan Wen, and our speaker, Steve Haynes, to come on screen now. We are grateful for you showing up today, and for all those who will be watching this after the fact, welcome to our American Congress of Rehabilitation Medicine webinar series. This is for the Complementary and Integrative Medicine group at ACRM. My name is Matt Erb, and I'm a physiotherapist in the United States, currently located in Tucson, Arizona. And I am co-chair of this webinar series, Hot Topics in Complementary and Integrative Rehabilitation Medicine. And I'm also an associate clinical director for the Center for Mind-Body Medicine, an NGO based out of Washington, DC. And now I'll ask Pei-Shan Wen to introduce herself as well, my co-chair.
Hi, everyone. My name is Pei-Shan Wen. I'm co-chair for this networking group, and I'm a faculty at Occupational Therapy Department in Georgia State University. So our speaker today is going to be Steve Haynes, and the topic of discussion is power and limits of touch. We will have a full discussion for Steve in a moment, but before that, I have some housekeeping to do. I would like to advise that this meeting is being recorded, and also please keep all your phone and mic mute. We do expect to have 5 to 10 minutes available for discussion at the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions, please type them in the chat box, and we will address that as many as we can. One additional tip is you can resize the portion of your screen that show video feed on one side and then the slide on the other. You can do this by using the sidebar that is from between the two sections and move it left or right. And with that, Matt, would you like to introduce the speaker?
Yes, so I'm thrilled to present Steve Haynes. I had the chance to present in another forum with Steve and was so impressed with his knowledge and wisdom and skill that we invited him on here to be our speaker today. Steve is a body worker for over 25 years and is the author of the award-winning Anxiety is Really Strange, which is part of a larger series of graphic books that include Pain is Really Strange, Trauma is Really Strange, and Touch is Really Strange, the latter being the focus of the topic today. Understanding the science of pain and trauma has transformed his approach to healing. Steve has studied chiropractic, yoga, shiatsu, biodynamic craniosacral therapy, and trauma releasing exercises, TRE. He teaches TRE and biodynamic craniosacral therapy all over the world, and his treatments use education, embodied awareness, and light touch to help people move more freely and be more present. Steve lives and works between London and Geneva and has a website, www.bodycollege.net. We're looking forward to hearing from you, Steve, and we'll now turn the presentation over to you as well as your slides. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to do the screen share. Good. So let's start with the big question. How do you know you exist? That kind of throws it out there, really, doesn't it? I'm going to be making a case for touch as fundamental to this process of engaging with the world and, probably more importantly, engaging with yourself. And these two things, being able to feel your inner world, being able to touch inwards is a framework that I use, is foundational for your ability to know anything and to touch outwards and engage and meet and explore your context and your environment, your relationships with other things that are sentient, humans, animals, living things, and also kind of the more solid things out there. So yeah, big framework. Touch is a fundamental that informs our very notion that we exist and the world exists. There's 4 sections to this talk. Why touch is essential for humans. So we'll look at how constructs are laid down by early experiences. And those early experiences are necessarily about meeting a world that touches us. I'm going to do, so that's quite a big framework. The second section is quite technical, looking at some of the mechanics of touch and looking at interoception and C fibers, and understanding that detail of science really, really helps us understand some of the features of touch that are so exciting. We'll look at the limits of touch. So I trained as a chiropractor, and unfortunately, a lot of the paradigm that I was taught hasn't really stood the test of time, certainly in changing pain. So certain things we should be cautious of, I would offer, from the current science about how touch works. And we need to reconstruct touch, I think. So I'm offering a framework of relational touch. Affective touch is a word you might hear. Non-doing touch. What can we really take from current science about how touch works? So that'll be the last section, part number 4. I'll pause every so often and we'll just check the chat. There'll be a few minutes for chat at the end, but let's dive in. This is me. My lockdown project was Touch is Really Strange. Yeah, you can get them in all good sources of books and bookstores. So number 1, why touch is essential for humans. I think this is a phenomenal picture. It kind of overturns all sorts of stereotypes for me. Men touching for support. And clearly something horrible has happened here. And just this kind of universal gesture of compassion as this person touches the person on the bed. Here's another version of touch. This is a newborn. Hopefully you'll see this video. So this is a very, very early experience of safety, delight, pleasure. Let's play that again. I think it's an extraordinary video of sort of receiving safety through this slow, gentle touch. Just the delight really being shown by the gestures of the baby in that case. So we are twitching and restless things. We're twitching and moving in utero. We move to find the edges, and we move to create a body schema, a kind of a sense that we have a size and shape. In that moving, in that case, we're in a fluid environment, but at some stage, we start hitting the limits of the uterine wall, and the space gets narrower and narrower as we get bigger and bigger. And then we do this massive journey of moving through the birth canal. And this is a journey of pressure and force. And we learn all sorts of things in that journey. We learn what is too much. We learn what is too quick. We learn to get help, or we learn to do things on our own. But we have a whole priming of our threat detection systems, a whole priming of our nervous system, and a whole underlying framework of learning about the world and how we meet the world through that birth journey. After birth, we hopefully are received into the loving embrace of our caregivers, our primary caregivers. And it turns out this gesture of contact is really, really important. For preterm babies that are born too early, a simple life-saving intervention is called Kangaroo Care, where the babies are strapped to the caregiver's chest, frequently the mother, and that's done just by skin-to-skin contact. Kangaroo Care saves preterm babies' lives. It's a phenomenal intervention, incredibly cheap, and is now rolled out around the world, recommended by the World Health Organization. Here's some of the benefits. UNICEF, one of the ancillary organizations for WHO. So why is skin-to-skin care important? It calms and relaxes both mother and baby. It regulates the baby's heart rate and breathing. There's colonization of bacteria, and also it reduces cortisol and stress levels, particularly following painful procedures. So I would offer phenomenal evidence of the importance of touch to the shaping and growing newborn. There's other studies, not just Kangaroo Care, that show that slow, gentle stroking processed by C fibers. I'm going to get into C fibers a little bit later on, but slow touch goes along a different pathway to fast touch. Slow touch stimulates C fibers. Babies who receive slow C fiber touch show reductions in stress, increased eye contact, smiling, and positive vocalizations. They have greater activity and connectivity strength in social brain regions and are more attentive to faces. And these effects of skin-to-skin contact and stroking in early birth are being shown. It's fairly new science. So the first cohorts are being studied at the ages of 10 and later now. And these effects of improved health, improved mental health are carrying on to the age of 10 in more recent studies. So just really, really powerful evidence I would offer that birth and early touch is fundamental to our health. We learn at this stage. All our constructs of safety emerge as inchoate shapes and patterns in our body, habits in the secretions and sensitivities and our nerves and cellular expression, a whole world of learning that happens before cognition, before words. We have this world of sensation that is already shaped and already formed before we can put words to it. Contemplation and knowing comes much, much later. So that's the advantage of getting touched. Unfortunately, there's devastating evidence of the lack of touch. So one of the clearest studies around this was the Romanian Orphanages in the 1980s. Ceausescu, communist autocratic regime, and the children, many of the children weren't actually orphans, they were just put into orphanages. These children were frequently had a lack of touch. Some very strange studies of carers who were swapped between the nurseries. So a carer or a nurse who touched the children where she used to be started faring worse. And when she moved to somewhere where there was no touch, the children started doing better, and vice versa. They studied mean nurses, nurses who didn't touch, and the children got better as soon as they were touched. And in the new orphanages that the mean nurse moved to, the children started faring much worse. An unrepeatable study, thankfully, but the lack of touch, very clear evidence that it promoted mental health issues and physical issues in childhood and in later life. We also know from studies of older people that old people fare worse without touch, feel lonelier, less able to manage on their own, more likelihood to be stressed, more likelihood to feel frail. So this is a panel from my book, Touch is Really, Really Strange. The references are in that book. But yeah, kind of, we don't do well when we're older when we don't receive touch. Good. And we've been through a massive experiment, haven't we, in lockdown of not touching. So I found this phrase, unbearable skin hunger. I think it's a really evocative phrase of the power and need for touch. I think some of the most devastating images in lockdown are old people being unable to be visited by their family. So I saw images of people touching through glass windows, just really, really painful. And even worse, people dying in hospital beds, their family can't be with them and they're communicating through a touch screen. Just heartbreaking images. And I think we've really learned that touch is fundamental to our experience as human beings. I'm just going to check everybody thinks going okay. Matt or anybody, give me a thumbs up, or anybody who's on screen, just making sure that you're hearing everything and we're all doing okay. Good. If there are any questions, just pop something in the chat. I'll stop again in 5-10 minutes and see if there's anything I need to pick up, and we'll stop again at the end. But if it's all going okay, I'll keep talking and keep sharing the screen. Okay, let's do a little bit of philosophy, just to keep doubling down on this notion that touch is really important. So Barry Smith is a very nice philosopher of consciousness and smell. He has this wonderful phrase, the sense we rely on most for reality is touch. We can have visions, we can have fantasies, we can be lost in mental constructs, but to know something is to touch something, according to Barry Smith. I grew up in England. Shakespeare is this sort of very important for English consciousness, and I grew up near Stratford, actually. So Macbeth knew this, one of the most famous scenes in cinema. Macbeth is contemplating murder, and he's having a vision, and he doesn't know what to trust. Is this a dagger which I see before me, the handle toward my hand? Come, let me clutch thee. I have thee not, yet I see thee still. So he has a vision, and he knows it's a vision because he can't clutch it. He can't touch it. It's a dagger of the mind, a false creation proceeding from his heat-oppressed brain. His feverish brain can create impressions. He's more likely to be able to trust those impressions if he can touch them. If he can't touch them, it's not real. Lovely piece of writing and version of touch as the way that we know reality and rely on it to make sure that things are real. There's many philosophers who explore this strand. Husserl, an existential philosopher, he was arguing against Descartes. Descartes would say, I think, therefore I am. We could interpret Husserl to say, I feel, I touch, therefore I am. So in our direct and immediate awareness of the body, we know it primarily through the various tactile sensations involved in any activity of touching something. We engage with the world, we push against the world, and it pushes back, sometimes not gently. And sometimes we push against sentient beings, and that mutual interaction helps us know that we exist and helps us know that there are other sentient beings out there. But that starts actually with touching ourselves, according to Husserl's philosophy. Dacia Keltner is an emotion researcher at Berkeley. Touch, my studies show, is the primary language of compassion, love, and gratitude, emotions at the heart of trust and cooperation. They do fabulous experiments of putting an arm through a rubber curtain so you can't see the person on the other side. And what can you communicate by touch, where all you can feel, where all you can perceive is their touch. You can't see them, smell them, hear them. And compassion is consistently communicable through touch, actually more profoundly than talking and speaking to people and moving your face. You're better at showing compassion by touching people, according to Dacia Keltner's research. Fantastic stuff, I think, about the importance of touch. One last quote from a philosopher. And it's this sort of shaping by birth, shaping by early experiences, the embodied patterns that emerge from experience our bodies from birth give coherent, meaningful structure to our physical experience at a preconceptual level. This is why I'm a body worker. This is why I don't focus on talking. I think skillful touch can lever these early learning experiences of safety and experience and meeting a world. We didn't learn about safety by talking to our caregivers. We learned about safety by being touched, by being received, by feeding, by gentle stroking, and by being held. That early patterning is still available to good body workers, I would offer. And if we skillfully engage at that preconceptual level through engaging with the world of touch, we can give massive good news to threat detection systems and help someone come out of stress responses that might be running them in the background. Good. So that's quite a large framework around touch. We're going to look at some detail now at the mechanics of touch. We'll do a sort of basic, some basic science around how nerves work, and then we'll look at some new science of interoception and slow touch. So the old model, touch is one of the classic 5 senses. This goes all the way back to the Greeks, and it's way too simple. We have more than 20 senses, according to some researchers: balance, echolocation, proprioception, a moving body in space, and interoception, the inner feeling states in your body. So touch is a complex perception. It's not a simple thing at all. This is a great book on touch, Linden, 2015. He states there is in fact no pure touch sensation. By the time we have perceived a touch, it has been blended with other sensory input, plans for action, expectations, and a healthy dose of emotion. Touch is a complex process. It's very, very far from simple. It's a perception ultimately, and perceptions are malleable, particularly malleable to our sense of safety and our sense of danger, or our habits of perceiving what is safe and what is dangerous. And here's another philosopher, actually. The sense of touch is closely connected to bodily awareness. Bodily sensation is necessary for tactual perception. Many aspects of touch are primarily directed not at the external world, but at the present state of our bodies. It's worth kind of deconstructing this a little bit. What's happening inside me, if my heart is beating and my gut is churning and I feel really, really tense, if I'm disconnected or defended within my own body, it's very hard for me to perceive what's happening around me. And this is right down to the level of hot, cold, tight, soft, just the ability to differentiate the information coming through my touch sensors. So what's happening inside me, my inner feeling state, actually determines my capability to differentiate my outer feeling state. That's a very, very interesting meta statement from a philosopher, but we're going to look at the nerves of feeling to really help us understand there's anatomical truth to this philosophical statement. Good. So some basic neurology. We have sensors all over our body, and we have nerves that communicate this information into our central nervous system. Here's a sensory neuron at the top, collecting information, carrying that information into the central nervous system. Here you can see the skin, and we have this, the cell body of a sensory nerve is in something called the dorsal root ganglion. These are mini brains. There's 62 dorsal root ganglions, 31 pairs of spinal nerves. We have 62 mini brains outside of our central nervous system that are sensitive. If you squeeze your dorsal root ganglions, you affect the signaling going along the nerves. And all sorts of other things actually affect the signal, it turns out. But classically, we collect signals, send an electrical information, and then it goes into the central nervous system. Let's keep going with this. Here's a slightly more precise diagram. Here's a thumb. Here's our sensory neuron taking information into the spinal cord. The synapse or joint at the spinal cord is an important place where the signal can be modulated. The signal's electrical, and then we have at the synapse, there's chemicals released to communicate with another nerve. Here's the nerve going up to the big brain. So electrical, then it releases chemicals, and then these chemicals are soaked up by ion channels. I want you to think of ion channels as like windows or doors that soak up interesting things. If this nerve that's receiving the signal, if it likes or if there's lots of new chemicals, think of it as opening lots of windows to get lots of fresh air in. And actually, we can manufacture new ion channels and open up new ion channels very quickly according to learning and the amount of stimulus. So yeah, nerves take signals from the outside and they have to communicate with other nerves, and they do this by sending out chemicals that are soaked up by ion channels. Stay with the detail. I'm hoping I'm going to make it really useful for you. So the first thing to learn is that we have quick nerves and slow nerves. Most of the science that I studied as a chiropractor was about quick nerves, the proprioceptive, things that take in the stretch of joints or the position of a moving body in space. They're called A fibers, and they were very well studied for decades and decades because they're quite thick and they show up easily on a microscope. However, they're forming only 25% of our sensory nerves. We have a lot of fine, slow nerves called C fibers, and these are the majority of sensory nerves, but they weren't that well studied until the last 10, 15 years. C fibers are 50 times slower, and they provide gentle touch, providing the neurobiological substrate for the development and function of the social brain. These C fibers are affective touch or emotional touch. They help us, those slow strokes that the babies had turn out to be really, really important and a very important ongoing social signal of safety. Slow touch is radically different from quick touch. The C fibers are also not just in your skin, they're throughout your whole body. Throughout all the layers of fascia in your body, in your blood vessels, and in your organs are all C fiber slow signals. We have this world of C fibers sensing the chemical milieu inside your body, sensing the pressure and contact you're making with the outside. The C fibers on the inside are not that different from the C fibers in our skin. C fibers give you the emotional tone of your interactions with the world. C fibers pick up all the homeostatic changes inside your body, and slow touch from the outside, outward touch, is mixed and affected by and processed with the inward touch of C fibers, sensing your cells, the chemicals, all the activity of homeostasis inside your body. Fantastic. To be sensitive is to rely on information coming through C fibers. And C fibers are sensitive because they have lots and lots of ion channels. Here's a picture of ion channels. Here's the outside of the cell. Here's the inside of the cell. This is necessarily complex. We have lots and lots of different types of ion channels. We have some that are sensitive to voltage, some that are sensitive to temperature, some that are sensitive to mechanical pushing and squeezing, some that are sensitive to inflammation. Inflammation turns out to be really, really important activity to monitor in our body. And all these signals change how nerves work. So particularly C fibers, that's the point I want to get. Let's look at a picture of A fibers and C fibers. Here's an A fiber. A fibers are thick, they have myelin, and they have relatively few ion channels. The ion channels are the little red dots here. Here's a C fiber, there's no myelin and there's far more ion channels. Ion channels are our sensitivity. They soak up chemicals. C fibers, there's far more C fibers, and C fibers are sensitive not just at the ends of the nerve, but along the whole length of the nerve. This is really, really new science, and it's amazing for body workers. Can we show my picture, Matt? Am I center screen right now? Or is it the ARC picture? No, well, hopefully you can see me. So we have sensors in our skin. In a classic nerve, the sensors pick up information, they send a signal along, and this signal sends out information to other nerves. That used to be the classic model, just one signal here generates an action potential, and then boom, it sends signals to other models. What we've actually learned is that it's not just sensitive at the end of the nerve, along the whole nerve, it's all soaking up chemicals through ion channels along the whole length of the axon. There's ion channels in the dorsal root ganglion. There's ion channels in the dorsal horn. C fibers are sensitive along the whole length of the nerve. They're really, really porous. They're really sensitive to your stress hormones. They're really sensitive to inflammatory markers. So we have this slow touch system that is deeply affected by the chemical states of stress, the chemical states of inflammation, all the hormones circulating in your body. To be sensitive is largely the activity of C fibers in your body. And these C fibers on the inside, in your organs, your blood vessels around your cells, are directly related to and directly influenced by the C fibers on the skin on the outside. Fantastic, I believe. We are sensitive on the inside, we can touch inwards, and this is related to our ability to touch outwards and perceive others and the world around us. Good. Let's just have a quote from a pain researcher, just reinforcing that. So Butler and Mosey, really great people around pain, talking about C fibers, nociception. They're particularly focused on pain or danger receptors. They don't have encapsulated endings, these neurons, so they're free nerve endings. They don't have specialized receptors. Basically, the nerve endings are just ion channels. But these nerves the action potentials can be generated anywhere along a nociceptor, at the ends of the nociceptor, the nerve axon, the dorsal root ganglion, and in the dorsal horn of the spinal cord. This is really new science. I wasn't taught anything like this as a chiropractor, that the fluid chemical milieu makes us sensitive. To feel is this territory that I've been talking about. Here's a neuron, here's a free nerve ending, and it's communicating in this example with immune cells. This is a blood vessel, immune cells, sending out signals, all these different ion channels causing different activity in the C fiber. Beautifully, beautifully complex. Even more complex, deliberately complex. Ion channel, this is a nerve in brown connecting to another nerve in green going to the brain. Before it gets to the brain and all the meanings we make up, we have all these ion channels that are deeply, deeply adaptive to experience and are deeply influenced by our threat perception, our stress profile, our inflammatory profile. Fantastic. Good. Okay, so hopefully I've made Kutch more complex for you, but much richer, I hope, that we are sensitive in extraordinary ways, and that feeling inwards, feeling outwards, if we do it slowly, we generate a very, very different type of signal from the classic type of I massage, pushing, poking, prodding to change physical structures. So this is important because we are discovering that the type of touch that we are generally taught in massage and in physiotherapy, chiropractic, certainly I know very well, that type of touch doesn't seem to have good evidence for changing the pain experience. So we are seeing memes such as manual therapy sucks. Physiotherapy now is focused on exercise and motivational interviewing to help people and explaining pain as an educational tool. And there's a movement to take touch away from the physiotherapy world. I think this is a huge mistake, kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Here's kind of the old model. By breaking down scar tissue and adhesions through sports massage, we can restore function to the muscle and relieve the subsequent pain that they can cause, scar tissue and adhesions. This type of thinking, unfortunately, hasn't really stood the test of time. As a chiropractor, I was trained that I could palpate the spine to work out what wasn't straight. I could manipulate the spine to make it straight, and that would change people's pain experience. There's actually very little evidence for that type of locally focused touch that can directly change local dynamics without as an independent feature. Here's how touch is conceived as working and manual therapy is conceived of as working. It is at last beginning to be more widely recognized that all manual therapy affects the tissues directly, very little, if at all. We don't treat muscle, we don't treat fascia, we don't treat tendons, we treat people with nervous systems. So this sense of appreciating that touch is complex, it's always emotional, it always has huge meanings and contexts, and that there's always a person being touched. We're not touching a knee, we're touching a whole person. If we can make that shift, we're getting into this territory of the fundamental experience of touch from early learning, that touch was a way to soothe, create safety, and help us have a sense of reality and what we can trust. Here's David Butler from the Explain Pain world, the physiotherapist. Soft tissue techniques work by changing the representation in the brain. We use touch and movement to offer nice, novel, safe input into the neuroimmune representation in the brain. This is a very, very different theoretical model about how touch works. It's not about changing local tissue dynamics. It's about helping people feel safe and levering slow C-fiber touch to generate affective qualities that are inherently emotional and inherently work only when people feel safe. Representation is an interesting word. That's complex, but the idea that we know we exist through feeling, and that the maps we make of our body are one version of the purpose of the brain is to regulate our physiology. We can flip rationality to say that rationally, if the brain's goal was to move and engage with the world and regulate our internal environment, we need to understand that pain or protective reflexes make sense because they're about protecting our internal integrity. We do strange things, we speed up, we collapse, but these are rational if the purpose of the brain is seen as bodily integrity and keeping our internal environment safe. We are not rationality as the old version where our thinking is at the top. Thinking is a byproduct of our regulatory abilities on the inside of our body. I like that sort of flipping of the hierarchy. It takes us away from being primitive animals where we have to, we have this world of unconscious, messy, difficult feelings that are primitive and just need to be controlled with rationality at the top. It's like there's an emotion sandwich between primitive bodies and the higher functions of mind. If we appreciate that it is rational to regulate our body because the goal of the brain is protecting our bodily integrity, I think that helps us understand again that feelings are important. The ability to notice and discern what's happening on the inside of us is a primary driver of activity for human beings. Good. I think we got time, so let's keep going into the limits of touch. So some panels from Touch is Really Strange. Really good evidence that we can't reliably diagnose by touch. Interoperator reliability, where experts compare their diagnosis of the position of a scapula or the tension in a muscle, is very, very poor. If I touch someone's shoulder and I analyze it, and you get someone else with similar training and similar skills, then our ability to come up with the same diagnosis is very, very poor. So that's one feature of the limits of touch. Even if we can't change tissues by primarily locally focused touch, poking, prodding, rubbing, trying to align things has really not come out of evidence-based research very, very well. That's not how it works. Tissues change because your big brain gets involved, because the representation changes. When it's safe, then we control things differently. So stiffness is almost entirely a perceptual construct. It's not about the actual tissue flexibility. It's about the perception of danger as the tissues change. Very, very clear evidence. And the third one, we can't reliably diagnose by touch. We can't change tissues by locally focused touch. We need to focus on the whole person. And even if we could diagnose, then change tissues, it doesn't really matter. Biomechanics is not a great tool for changing pain. Straight spines are no more or less likely to be painful than bent spines. Measuring the leg length, measuring the upslip of a sacrum, measuring shoulder lengths, they're very, very poor indicators. And changing those local biomechanics have come out again very, very poorly in changing people's pain experience. So even if we could diagnose and could change the tissues, it doesn't really matter. Biomechanics is not the solution to complex stories of pain. The goal of touch should not be local dynamics. The goal of touch should be a safe, meaningful stimulus to engage a person in their world. We touch whole people, not parts of people, always. If we acknowledge that, it's transformative. So, relational touch, just finishing up for a few more minutes and then some time for chat. Here's an example of bad touch. Angela Merkel, the most powerful woman in the world at the time. She experiences a horrible back rub from George Bush. He surprised her. And she goes into a classic startle response. So we really, really need to not do this when we touch. I like this one, Dr. Spock doing gentle touch. I grew up with this notion of touch from Spock as a very powerful thing, kind of stayed with me. We have hugs as transformational gestures of love and acceptance. So really heartwarming tributes from free mom hugs and free dad hugs on LGBTQ parades in the last few years. Really, really lovely about how a hug can repattern whole stories and reconnect people in a way that poking, prodding, and directive touch just really can't work. There's really good evidence that hand-holding supportive touch leads to less pain. This is slow C-fiber touch where the focus is not changing tissues, but meeting a whole person. It's interpersonal touch with an intention of providing emotional support. There's some good papers summarizing touch that is beyond biomechanics. I really recommend this paper. A large amount of evidence has identified hands-on techniques as a pain modular, playing a role at multiple levels beyond biomechanics. They talk about 3 types of touch. Analgesic touch, so a counter stimulation based on gait theory. Your parents probably did that when you were a kid. You fell over, you knocked your leg, they rub it quickly, and the pain disappears. So we just need to put in a new safe stimulus and the pain experience will go down. Effective touch. This is all about the C fibers touching inwards, touching outwards, trying to get those slow C fibers, all those ion channels working. This is inherently about emotion. We need touch from sympathetic providers. Who knew? I mean, on some levels, that really isn't surprising, but there's much, much more we can do to learn to provide effective, safe touch. And then representation, somatoperceptual touch. We have maps upon maps upon maps in our brain. We have autonomic maps. We have, the classic somatosensory maps. There's maps all over the brain. The more we can feel nuance and detail, the more skillful that we are at differentiating our inner feeling states. And I firmly believe that getting touched by other people, one of its primary ways of working is helping people connect to the representations they make and learning to play with them and change them. Frequently in pain, people have very distorted experiences of their body, and touch is a great way of rebooting the maps of their body. Last slide. Old model. Touch works by changing local tissue dynamics. Touch is secondary to language, emotion, and concepts. The new model I'm arguing for, touch is a fundamental experience, fundamental importance to our sense of self. Touch can be a safe, novel stimulus to a stuck organism. Relational touch, effective touch, has the potential to switch off protective reflexes and promote learning and growth. Good. I hope that was useful. Going to have a pause for a bit, Matt, and try and collect some questions, and very open to see if I can answer any queries.
Yes, absolutely. So if anyone has any questions, please drop them into the chat, and I will actually start with a question myself. I'm wondering about how sensory processing, touch, and relationship can differ, not just across people in general, but in particular for neurodiverse individuals, autistic persons, and if and how you might approach touch differently.
Yes, well, I don't know a huge amount around that, but a little bit. So one theorist around feeling, he's focused on how we feel the inner world, particularly through the vagus. So lots of these C fibers in our vagus and lots of C fibers in the fascia and skin. He talks about autism, so certain behaviors of rocking or flapping hands or limiting the stimulation. Some people with autism, it's so hard to regulate their inner feeling states. Sometimes they're feeling too much, sometimes they're feeling really heightened things, sometimes they're not feeling, it's hard for them to differentiate feelings. So this inner world that's hard to make sense of, they need extra behaviors to regulate that. Now, sometimes there's so much going on, I believe, for people who are neurodiverse that it's very, very hard to receive touch because it's an extra stimulation that may have never been particularly patterned well for them. But I would offer that somehow, theoretically, some neurodiverse problems are founded on a lack or unusual ways of feeling. And theoretically, it's possible to reboot some of those and provide a range of stimulus to reboot those feeling mechanisms. Does that speak to your question, Matt?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. I'm not seeing other questions, so I'm going to go with another one myself because this is a hot topic for me as well. And so this is maybe a bit of a long question preceded by a comment or some background. I'm very grateful that you have called out that there are both local physiological or tissue changes and the upstream processing, because I feel that the pain science world sometimes becomes overly brain centric, or even worse, suggests that pain is not a sensation, but simply or only a perception by the brain. And so, for example, recent evidence in persons with chronic low back pain suggests that there are sort of micro-inflammation or neuroimmune mediated changes at that local level or in those mini brains, as you said, so sort of downstream. And in the integral view, it's sort of both and. It's what's going on in the body and it's what's going on in the brain, and then that more whole person relationship. And I'm wondering, at the same time, we know that there are correlates such as memory, beliefs, thoughts, and emotions that interact with or modulate that nociception. So I'm wondering, how do you, what language do you use to help people sort of with that mind-body splitting, or that mind-body, there's a philosophy within this sort of top-down, bottom-up, both and. So I'm wondering how you work with that.
Yeah, no, the language is complex. And at one level it becomes, you just need to define your terms, and then most people end up agreeing, really. But I like the idea of feelings. I think that's an ordinary language word that works quite well in English. So we all conceive of feelings as sensations: tight, soft, hot, cold. So on that level, there's raw feeling states. And some technical words for that are affect. That's our first way of making sense of that. There's this whole world of sensations. So yes, that raw sensation, this preconceptual, this world of information, I often do use the word sensation for that, or feelings as sensation. And then we have this other meaning of feelings in English, where feelings as emotion. So feelings as a complex construct, where feelings co-emerge as emotions, thoughts, and memories all at the same time. So typically as a body worker, I'm helping people start by feelings as sensations, this raw data that's coming in, and hot, cold, tight, soft, geography, giving things a size and location is really, really powerful. Our hippocampus is a spatially organized thing. So hippocampus is about memory, but it's also about space and geography. So it's actually a very, very nice gesture to say, where do you feel that? How do you feel that? What's the size, shape, weight of what you feel? This territory of being getting good at just the raw data that's coming in. And those first steps of something simple becoming complex, where we have responses to this raw data. And this is the level of affect. I like it or I dislike it. It arouses me or it's calm. I think there's a huge amount of work in practicing those things and playing with them. And then how do we make sense of those things? We have stories, memories that always modulate that simple data. And we are meaning-making devices, and that's beautiful, beautifully complex, irreducibly complex. I would offer that we can always tell ourselves more stories. I hope the goal, I'm often saying to my clients, is to try and be an author of the story, to try and tell ourselves more beautiful, more elegant stories, to constrict things differently. How do I know that this is pain? How do I know this is anxiety? Often we use the words and constructs we've been given to us, often the most negative shorthand constructs, and we take on board all these things that we just do it because it's a bad habit or because it's too much, really. So we use simple shorthand constructs to things that can be really constructed very differently. So yeah, so that level of perception is very malleable. I would say involves constructs and stories, often things we're given. But if we start with feelings as sensations, we can choose. We can create a little gap between doing what we've always done, always using the shorthand that we've been given. And maybe we can learn to say that feeling isn't about me being old, or it isn't about me being broken. It hurts and I don't like it, but it could be something else. So yeah, all of that. I hope that wasn't too much and made sense.
Made sense to me and not too much at all. So let's see if there's anyone else with a question. Susan has her hand up. You can go ahead and jump in, Susan.
Well, I've been trying to work out how to write it, but I can't. So I'll just speak instead, seeing as I'm on video. So at the moment, well, this whole year, I've had what physiotherapists are claiming to be or diagnosing as rotator cuff tendinopathy. and basically physio exercises, physio manipulation is just not touching it at all. In fact, if anything, I would argue it's making it worse because I'm tensing. So I suppose what I'm really asking, and I do some work on the nervous system as well with a somatic experiencing therapists, so I know the benefits of that. But what I can't quite, there's no right answer to this. I can't quite get out my head that there's damage, so therefore I have to do something. So I suppose what I'm kind of saying is, would nervous system work alone get rid of the pain?
Yeah, damage is a big thing. So we need to double down and work out what that means for you is one strategy. But some of the science around damaged shoulders is really, really interesting. So often one thing, rotator cuff tendinopathy, it sounds really weird. It's a long phrase and most people don't know what it means. So we think of tendons. I mean, often we have tendons in our Achilles, or you can feel tendons here. We think of them as strings. And one of the images of damage is that my string is broken. It's often frayed. We have this quite dramatic, it's almost like your shoulders hanging on by a thread. And that's really, really not the case. Your rotator cuff is much more like a blanket that surrounds your shoulder. And if there's damage, it might be at the level of a hole in the blanket. So that's a very interesting image to offer yourself. I'm not hanging on by a string. I've got a blanket that's in place. And what they're seeing is a little bit of hole in the blanket. So that's a nice way of reconstructing the damage for some people. It might also be good to know that if you repair the rotator cuff, for some people, so this is evidence from shoulder surgeons, you repair the rotator cuff, and then you examine those shoulders a period later, a year or 2 years. Some people will improve and will have less pain, but a proportion of the people who improve and have less pain, the repair didn't work. And the damage, the holes are still there. So they've got better because the surgery was a big dramatic intervention. And the theory was they were sewing up the holes, but actually they showed that the proportion of the people who got better, the surgery didn't actually work. The frayed hole is still there a year later. So damage is not inconsequential, but it's not the primary thing here. And there's endless stories around that. The more we look at structures, you really can't blame the structures for the whole of a complex pain process.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's just my mind. I'd actually like to actually truly believe that.
Yeah, Susan, here's the thing. It's not just your mind. It's beautifully, fabulously, wonderfully your mind. Your mind makes meanings, and that meanings are dependent on feeling safe. Good luck exploring that journey, and hopefully some suggestions have helped there.
Yeah, thank you. Brilliant.
All right, well, I'm going to step in because we are actually at time. So Peishan and I wish to thank you, Steve, for sharing your experience and your expertise, and thank you everyone for listening. This recording will be available on ACRM's YouTube channel in the next 1 to 2 business days. Please do recommend our webinar series to your colleagues and share Steve's talk widely. Thank you, everyone, and we hope to see you soon. Peishan?
Yes. Yeah, that's all.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks for tuning in, folks.